Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. This is episode number 57. We will be going through this chapter, the sacrifice, the Triune path, and the Lord of the sacrifice, starting with the fourth paragraph. In the first three paragraphs, Sri Aurobindo gave us an overview of what sacrifice is. It is a law. It's a law that is behind the entire evolutionary process, where the divine consciousness has plunged into this material inconscience and ignorance to eliminate it, to liberate it, to transform it. And that self-giving of the divine into the law of force and matter, that's the very foundation of this law of sacrifice, and it is the common divine action behind action of all the multiplicity of individuals who are engaged in work in the world, and it is the unifying law. And it is nothing can exist without giving and receiving. Whether we like it or not, we must give. There is a constant exchange between all life forms, and it is an absolute must. So the earlier we understand and learn to give conscious sacrifice, we can begin our journey of accelerating the ascension of this law, the traveling of this sacrifice from mere mutual vital physical associations to more emotional empathic connections, to an ecstatic fusing of soul with soul, where true spiritual unity is experienced through joyful self-giving, knowing that we are giving to that one self that is behind all things. And even the human love culminates in this experience of fusion, interfusion of the very spiritual substance with the other, and you discover yourself in the other, and unity with all life, all existence. So that's the journey of sacrifice, the law of giving oneself, offering oneself. It is there in nature everywhere. Now we are going deeper into this journey. This profounder idea of the worldwide law is at the heart of the teaching about works given in the Gita. Remember, previous chapter was stressing on the Gita. Gita is the most, we can say, authoritative text on Karma Yoga. And this worldwide law of sacrifice is right at the heart of the Gita. Action done as sacrifice. This profounder idea of the worldwide law is at the heart of the teaching about works given in the Gita. A spiritual union with the highest by sacrifice. An unreserved self-giving to the eternal is the core of its doctrine. Giving oneself without any reserve, unconditionally, to the eternal, to the highest. We are offering ourselves entirely. It is through that our profound spiritual growth and flowering takes place. The vulgar conception of sacrifice is an act of painful self-immolation, austere self-mortification, difficult self-effacement. This kind of sacrifice may go even as far as self-mutilation and self-torture. So in the name of sacrifice, there is a great deal of distortion and even perversions happening in the so-called spiritual circles. Sacrifice is often considered as an act of painful self-immolation, austere self-mortification, like really torturing oneself by denying all kinds of, whether it is material comforts or other forms of inflicting pain upon oneself, all that are like in the name of eliminating my ego, my senses craving for pleasure. You torture your senses, you kill them through an ascetic dryness or through violence inflicted upon the body. These are all distortions. This kind of sacrifice may go even as far as self-mutilation and self-torture. So this is something to be aware of. There are many such expressions you can find in India. So the vulgar conception of sacrifice is an act of painful self-immolation, austere self-mortification, difficult self-effacement. This kind of sacrifice may go even as far as self-mutilation and self-torture. That is not at all what the essence of sacrifice is. These things may be temporarily necessary in man's hard endeavor to exceed his natural self. If the egoism in his nature is violent and obstinate, it has to be met sometimes by an answering strong internal repression and counterbalancing violence. So there are individuals who are very violent and obstinate in their nature. The ego is so hard, obstinate, violent. In order to crack that hard nut, sometimes a strong internal repression and a counterbalancing violence is required. And it is such individuals who tend to take the path of such self-torture, such self-denial, in order to crack open that hard, thick shell of the ego and its violence. But these are exceptions, very rare. So these things may be temporarily necessary in man's hard endeavor to exceed his natural self. If the condition is, if the egoism in his nature is violent and obstinate, it has to be met sometimes by an answering strong internal repression and counterbalancing violence. But the Gita discourages any excess of violence done to oneself. For the self within is really the Godhead evolving. It is Krishna. It is the divine. It has not to be troubled and tortured as the titans of the world trouble and torture it, but to be increased, fostered, cherished, luminously opened to a divine light and strength and joy and wideness. That is the right way to approach, not the violence. Because what we have within is Krishna, the divine, sacred presence that is evolving. And this is not to be tortured and troubled. The tendency of the Asuric, the titanic nature, the Titans have this tendency to trouble and torture the thick, hard, violent ego. Such personalities may resort to violence, but it is the wrong thing to do. The Gita discourages any excess of violence done to oneself, for the self within is really the Godhead evolving. It is Krishna, it is the divine. It has not to be troubled and tortured as the Titans of the world trouble and torture it, but to be increased, fostered, cherished, luminously opened. That is what we need to do. Increase the presence of the divinity, foster it, cherish it, luminously open to a divine light and strength and joy and wideness. We have to open ourselves to that wideness and joy and strength and light. It is not oneself, but the band of the Spirit's inner enemies that we have to discourage, expel, slay upon the altar of the growth of the Spirit. Instead of torturing oneself, what we need to do is we have to discourage, expel, and slay the inner enemies, Spirit's inner enemies. That is what we need to slay, expel, discourage. What are they? These can be ruthlessly excised, whose names are desire, wrath, inequality, greed, attachment to outward pleasures and pains, the cohort of upsurging demons that are the cause of the soul's errors and sufferings. So these are the inner enemies of the Spirit. The whole clan, the whole cohort of upsurging demons in ancient literature, Puranas, we find Devas and Asuras, the Asuric forces, the demonic forces within us. It is desire, wrath, inequality, greed, attachment to outward pleasures and pains. These are the things to be conquered, excised, ruthlessly excised. That's the term he is using. So it is not oneself, but the band of the Spirit's inner enemies that we have to discourage, expel, slay upon the altar of the growth of the Spirit. What truly matters is the growth of the Spirit, the divinity within us, the Deva, the divine qualities within us, that must grow. On that altar, we have to eliminate all this. These can be ruthlessly excised, whose names are desire, wrath, inequality, greed, attachment to outward pleasures and pains. The cohort of upsurging demons that are the cause of the soul's errors and sufferings. Upsurging. They rise up from our lower nature. They are not that come from above. It is upsurging ones, rising from below, from the subconscient caves, our subconscious regions. There are these forces residing that will surge forth in the process of yoga. They are the shadowy elements. These are to be slain, eliminated from our inner nature, because they cause the soul's errors and sufferings. So these are the enemies. These should be regarded not as part of oneself, but as intruders and perverters of ourselves' real and diviner nature. these have to be sacrificed in the harsher sense of the word. But whatever pain in going they may throw by reflection on the consciousness of the seeker. So there is a harsher sense of the word sacrifice, which is a kind of a painful elimination, giving away. There is a line in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo says, he pulled desire out of its bleeding roots and offered the vacant space to the gods. So when we pull out the desires, there are these bleeding roots within us. There is certain pain, reflection of pain in our individual consciousness when we eradicate these things, eliminate from our consciousness. They should be regarded not as part of oneself, these forces that causes error and suffering of the soul. They are not part of ourself, but as intruders and perverters of ourselves' real and diviner nature. They intrude, they pervert, they rise up from our subconscious regions from below. So intruders and perverters of self's real and diviner nature. These have to be sacrificed in the harsher sense of the word. They are the one to be really slain, if we may use such harsh word. Whatever pain in going they may throw, because they won't necessarily leave easily. They cause some drama, some pain by reflection on the consciousness of the seeker. It is through reflection in our consciousness they give this experience of pain and suffering, and they are to be eliminated from our being because not part of our true nature. But the true essence of sacrifice is not self-immolation, it is self-giving. Its object not self-effacement but self-fulfillment. Its method not self-mortification but a greater life. Not self-mutilation but a transformation of our natural human parts into divine members. Not self-torture but a passage from a lesser satisfaction to a greater ananda. So here Sri Aurobindo is giving a set of pairs, distinguishing between what is true essence of sacrifice and the false idea of sacrifice. So the first pair is, the false idea is it is self-immolation. No, it is not. What it is a self-giving. You joyously give yourself. So that's the difference. Second is, it is not self-effacement but self-fulfillment. That is, you are effacing yourself, eliminating yourself, removing yourself from the picture. You are sacrificing yourself. Kind of a painful idea of self-effacement. Instead, what actually the sacrifice is about, self-fulfillment. You find your fullness in the process of giving yourself, discovering yourself. So it's not self-effacement but self-fulfillment. Third pair is, its method is not self-mortification. There is no torturing of oneself, but a greater life. There is no shrinking of one's life, elimination of one's life, making yourself small, nothing. Instead, you are expanding into a greater life. So, no self-mortification, but a greater life. The next one, not self-mutilation, but a transformation. So instead of mutilating the parts of our being that are not necessarily in alignment with a greater self, the true sacrifice is in transforming them, of our natural human parts into divine members. So we don't mutilate, we transform. Not self-torture, but a passage from a lesser satisfaction to greater ananda. So there is no self-torture by denying the rasa, the juice of life. Instead, there is a passage from lesser satisfaction to greater ananda, taking samarasa in all life. Greater and greater levels of ananda. So it is a path of immense freedom and joy when you truly bring in the right understanding of sacrifice and enlarge and expand and give yourself, you enter into greater and greater ananda. When there is a false understanding, that is where it becomes self-torture, self-immolation, self-effacement, self-denial, self-torture, self-immolation, all that. These are all false ideas, false understanding. What we need is self-giving, self-fulfillment, expansion. So once again, let me read it. But the true essence of sacrifice is not self-immolation, it is self-giving. Its object, not self-effacement, but self-fulfillment. Its method, not self-mortification, but a greater life. Not self-mutilation, but a transformation of our natural human parts into divine members. Not self-torture, but a passage from lesser satisfaction to a greater ananda. There is only one thing painful in the beginning, to a raw or turbid part of our surface nature. It is the indispensable discipline demanded, the denial necessary for the merging of the incomplete ego. So initially, the whole idea of self-discipline, that can feel to be painful. And that is what the ego, and particularly with the lower nature, try to eliminate as much as possible. I don't want any discipline. So there is a tendency to look for philosophy that enables, like everything is great, all life is nothing but divine. You can use that philosophy. I'm going with the flow, eternal now, spontaneously, living spontaneously. All that cover up that people use in order to avoid discipline that is absolutely necessary. There is only one thing painful in the beginning, to a raw or turbid part of our surface nature. It is the indispensable discipline demanded, the denial necessary for the merging of the incomplete ego. But for that, there can be a speedy and enormous compensation. Speedy and enormous compensation in the discovery of a real greater or ultimate completeness in others, in all beings, in the cosmic oneness, in the freedom of the transcendent self and spirit, in the rapture of the touch of the divine. So initially there is this discipline and denial of all that diverts and distracts, distorts, perverts. So that strong discipline is rewarded in a speedy and enormous compensation when you discover that greater or ultimate completeness. That completeness that we find in merging with others, with all life, cosmic oneness, in the freedom of the transcendent self and spirit, in the rapture of the touch of the divine. Our sacrifice is not a giving without any return or only fruitful acceptance from the other side. It is an interchange between the embodied soul and conscious nature in us and the eternal spirit. It is this interchange between the embodied soul and conscious nature in us and the eternal spirit. There is this eternal spirit behind all things. There is an exchange with that by this embodied soul and conscious nature. We are part of that conscious nature, we are embodied, and when we give ourselves to that eternal spirit, there is this immense return, the grace pouring into our life. So our sacrifice is not a giving without any return, even though we don't demand any return. It is an unconditional self-giving to the divine. Our sacrifice is not a giving without any return or any fruitful acceptance from the other side. It's not just you give yourself to the divine, there is also the acceptance from the other side. The divine accepts your sacrifice. It is an interchange between the embodied soul and conscious nature in us and the eternal spirit. For even though no return is demanded, yet there is the knowledge deep within us that a marvelous return is inevitable. So even if we do not demand, deep within us we know there is the divine providence that will take care. A marvelous return is inevitable. The soul knows that it does not give itself to God in vain, claiming nothing. It yet receives the infinite riches of the divine power and presence. When the divine pours into you, the divine power and presence grows within you, all around you, and you start melting and merging with the larger life. It is the action of that original law of sacrifice. The more the divine pours into you, the more divine takes you and offer to the world, and you surrender entirely to that action. So the soul knows that it does not give itself to God in vain, claiming nothing. It yet receives the infinite riches of the divine power and presence. It is infinite. It's incalculable. Human mind cannot fathom what the divine grace can pour and bring into you. And you don't demand anything. You give yourself unconditionally, freely, entirely, without any trace of reservation, joyously. That's where your growth is rapidly beginning to progress. Last, there is to be considered the recipient of the sacrifice and the manner of the sacrifice. Who is receiving all that is offered? What is the manner of this sacrifice? The sacrifice may be offered to others, or it may be offered to the divine powers. It may be offered to the cosmic all, or it may be offered to the transcendent supreme. So these are the different levels Sri Aurobindo is bringing. Others, people around us. Next is divine powers. Behind the people, there are divine powers. Behind, in the nature, there are divine powers. Now, beyond that, there is cosmic all. And beyond that cosmic all, there is a transcendent supreme. So these are four different gradations he is bringing in. Others, divine powers, cosmic all, transcendent supreme. So the sacrifice may be offered to others, or it may be offered to the divine powers. It may be offered to the cosmic all, or it may be offered to the transcendent supreme. The worship given may take any shape, from the dedication of a leaf or flower, a cup of water, a handful of rice, a loaf of bread, to consecration of all that we possess and the submission of all that we are. Here Sri Aurobindo is bringing the reference straight from the Gita, where he says it is the offering, dedicating a leaf, a flower, a cup of water, a handful of rice, a loaf of bread. Sri Krishna says, all that is eventually come to me, the self behind all. Now, these are things: leaf, flower, cup of water, handful of rice, etc. Beyond that, consecration of all that we possess and the submission of all that we are. So, whatsoever we possess and whatever we are, all that is good and bad, everything is offered as a sacrifice, self-giving. Nothing is held back. The worship given may take any shape, from the dedication of a leaf. He's using the word worship, puja, worship, where it's a ritual in which we offer. And that ritual actually represents symbolically this cosmic sacrifice. There is a self behind all things. It is to that self we are offering. All our thought, speech, action, everything is an offering to that self. But it is not conscious in our awareness. Therefore, these rituals are created where people offer various things to a deity. It is a training given to the human body and mind and heart to learn to make the conscious offering. So the worship may be given. Worship given may take any shape, from the dedication of a leaf, flower, a cup of water, handful of rice, a loaf of bread, to consecration of all that we possess and the submission of all that we are. Whoever the recipient, whatever the gift, it is the supreme, the eternal in things, who receives and accepts it, even if it be rejected or ignored by the immediate recipient. So when you're giving something to someone, a human individual, they may accept or they may reject. This person is only an immediate recipient. Behind the recipient is the divine self presiding over all life, all people, all beings. Who receives it? Even if the immediate recipient is outwardly rejecting, it is your giving that matters. Whoever the recipient, whatever the gift, it doesn't matter what you are giving or even to whom you are giving. Whoever the recipient, whatever the gift, it is to the supreme, the eternal in things. And this is the thing we must remember. Install this idea deep into our heart. It is to the supreme, to the eternal in things, who receives and accepts it. Ultimately, it is that which is receiving and accepting it, even if it be rejected or ignored by the immediate recipient. We tend to see only the outer personality and the front end individuals to whom we try to give things and they reject and ignore, and then we feel hurt. There is no need. When we begin to see it is not the supreme self who is rejecting things, everything that is moving out of you is pouring into the supreme, into the eternal self behind all things, the eternal in all things. For the supreme who transcends the universe is yet here too, however veiled in us, in the world, and in its happenings. He is there as omniscient witness, the receiver of all our works and their secret master. There is this cosmic witness who is receiving all things and who is also the master, the secret master of existence, who is behind all things. It is to whom everything that is going. For the Supreme who transcends the universe, on one hand, Supreme transcends all this manifest world. It is beyond this manifest world, formless, eternal, timeless. And yet, that Supreme is yet here too, however veiled, in us and in the world, and in its happenings. So this veiled divine presence is there in us, in all things, and in all happenings. He is there as the omniscient witness. Omniscient witness. This witness, the witness who is looking out through you, it is a little tip of the cosmic, large, universal witness who is behind all things. It's omniscient, knows everything that is happening in the universe. It is present everywhere. And receiver of all our works and their secret master. The master of our works, master of our sacrifice is that. It is present always behind the veil. All our actions, all our efforts, even our sins and stumblings and sufferings and struggles are obscurely or consciously known to us and seen, or else unknown in a disguise, governed in their last result by the One. Whether we are conscious of our own motivations and impulses and deeper currents, whether we are conscious of them or not, the one divine presiding over all this knows everything and who is the recipient and the master of all that we do. So all our actions, all our efforts, even our sins and stumblings. So it's not just all our virtues, good qualities that we offer. Even all our sins and stumblings and sufferings and struggles are obscurely or consciously known to us and seen or else unknown and in a disguise, governed in their last result by the One. So the result of all that we do, good or bad, everything is secretly governed by that one being, one consciousness. All is turned towards Him in His numberless forms and offered through them to the single omnipresence. So there is the single omnipresence, present everywhere in everything. There are numberless forms. So all is turned towards Him in His numberless forms and offered through them to the single omnipresence. In whatever form and with whatever spirit we approach Him, in that form and with that spirit, He receives the sacrifice. We may not be conscious, but the omnipresent divine knows every stumble, error, good fortune, ill fortune, all actions, everything. Sin and virtue, everything is known by that. We may not know. And it receives everything. There is no secret with the divine. There is nothing ego can hide from the divine, because divine is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. It is its cosmic purpose that is getting worked out, and you're only an instrumental condition through which it is doing its work. So the more you become conscious of it, and more you make the conscious effort and self-giving, more it will be revealed. And in whatever form and in whatever spirit we approach Him, in that form and with that spirit, He receives the sacrifice. Always it is received. It's very, very important to remember. When the ego is shut in itself, there are moments of darkness. We feel disconnected from everything. And then you see people complaining. The divine doesn't care for me, doesn't love me, doesn't show me the way. Just that we are not aware. Even in that sense of disconnected entrapment in the ego, we are held by the omniscient divine. In whatever form and with whatever spirit we approach him, in that form and with that spirit, he receives the sacrifice. And the fruit also of the sacrifice of works varies according to the work, according to the intention in the work, and according to the spirit that is behind the intention. So he is deconstructing a movement of work. First is a type of work. There is work happening. Behind work, there is intention. Intention in the work. Behind that intention, there is the spirit that is directing it. So there is the spirit, and there is the intention, and there is the outer form of work that is unfolding. The fruit also of the sacrifice of works, we are offering the works to the cosmic self, the supreme self. The fruit also of the sacrifice of works varies according to the work. So the results that comes to us vary according to the type of work we do, and according to the intention in the work, also according to the spirit that is behind the intention. So the what pours back into us is depending upon these three different layers: the type of work we do, the intention behind the work, and the spirit that is standing behind the intention. But all other sacrifices are partial, egoistic, mixed, temporal, incomplete. Even those offered to the highest powers and principles keep this character. The result too is partial, limited, temporal, mixed in its reactions, effective only for minor or intermediate purpose. This is usually our life. There is a partial, egoistic, mixed, temporal, incomplete way of doing sacrifice because we are not aware of the law of sacrifice. So there is a confused way of doing the sacrifice. Semi-conscious, unconscious, habitual, sometimes a little bit conscious. And we do it partially. So sacrifices are partial, egoistic, mixed, temporal, incomplete. Even those offered to the highest powers and principles keep this character. We may offer to the highest, but even that offering is often partial, egoistic, mixed, temporal, and incomplete. The result too is partial, limited, temporal, mixed in its reactions, effective only for a minor or intermediate purpose. So its effectivity is only for a short term, not a large movement, because we are unconscious in our daily work. Work has to become conscious and a complete self-giving at all the levels. There is the outer form of work that is offered, the intention behind the work that is offered, and then there is the spirit behind the intention. All that will define the nature of returns that will flow back. The one entirely acceptable sacrifice is the last and highest, utmost self-giving. It is that surrender made face to face, with the devotion and knowledge, freely and without any reserve, to one who is at once our immanent self, the environing constituent all, the supreme reality beyond this or any manifestation, and secretly all these together, concealed everywhere the immanent transcendence. Complex sentence, but it is the purest form of sacrifice Sri Aurobindo is bringing in. It is a sacrifice done face to face. You are looking at the divine. You are not looking at people or things or events. You are looking at the divine face to face. Now, that seeing can be at any of the levels, where it could be the one who is immanent, who is involved and behind all the forms, immanent self, or environing constituent all, that is behind the entire creation. It surrounds everything and it is behind all things. We may offer to an immanent divine in a form involved in it, or that which is behind all things, or the third is the supreme reality beyond this or any manifestation. Beyond time and space it is standing. So we can offer our unreserved self-giving through works to this one who may be visible, accessible to us, or we are able to sense the presence in the immanent form, in the cosmic or in the transcendent way. Offer face to face. That is what is asked from us. So the one entirely acceptable sacrifice is the last and highest, utmost self-giving. Utmost self-giving. It is that surrender made face to face. I am coming to you, I am surrendering to you, consciously, utterly, without reserve. It is that surrender made face to face with devotion and knowledge. Deep devotion. Your heart is involved, your mind is involved, and then your will, the entire, all three faculties, everything together with the devotion and knowledge, freely and without any reserve, to one who is at once our immanent self. It is our own immanent self, the environing constituent all, or the supreme reality beyond this or any manifestation. And secretly, all these together, concealed everywhere, the immanent transcendence. It's immanent transcendence, concealed behind all things, everywhere, simultaneously. It is to that which we offer ourselves unconditionally, all the works with love and devotion. For to the soul that wholly gives itself to Him, God also gives Himself altogether. That's the beauty of this process. The one who gives himself to the divine, divine gives himself entirely. To the soul that wholly gives itself to Him, God also gives Himself altogether. Only the one who offers his whole nature finds the self. Offering one's whole nature, nothing is held back. There is no reservation saying that this part of me is not good enough, this part of me is not ready, as if divine doesn't know. Divine knows everything, every thought, every emotion, every sensation, because everything is moved by that omniscient witness, omniscience, all-pervading, veiled, supreme reality that knows everything. So, giving oneself entirely, completely, offering whole nature, when you do that, then you find the self. Then your mold of the little trapped ego or the entrapment of the ego dissolves and you merge, melt into the self that is behind all this. Only the one who can give everything enjoys the divine all everywhere. Only the one who can give everything enjoys the divine all everywhere. Only supreme self-abandonment attains to the supreme. Beautiful. Supreme self-abandonment attains to the supreme. You entirely abandon yourself in the infinity, in the eternity. Then you attain to the supreme. That's the condition. A supreme self-abandonment. Only the sublimation by sacrifice of all that we are can enable us to embody the highest and live here in the immanent consciousness of the transcendent spirit. So we have to live here on this earth. We are not looking at leaving this world and going into the formless. It is about living here in this world in absolute freedom and delight of the spirit. It is for that only the sublimation by sacrifice of all that we are. So there is a sublimation, there is a refinement, there is an alchemy of transformation that unfolds. And you move more and more towards the sublime depths of your being, into the infinity of your being. So only the sublimation by sacrifice of all that we are, by offering all that we are, can enable us to embody the highest. It's about embodying the highest. It's not renouncing the bodily existence, but embodying the highest. And live here in the immanent consciousness of the transcendent spirit. Immanent consciousness. On one hand, spirit is transcendent, beyond the creation, but it is involved here in its immanent consciousness of that transcendent spirit. We can live in that embodied state of being. The highest pours down into the mold and transforms the mold, the instrument, bringing the highest possible ecstasy, liberation, freedom, creativity, all that through works. So without rejecting the world, embracing the world by giving yourself, knowing the world as the supreme self. There you're abandoning yourself into the infinity. And through that, the highest riches pours into you, elevates you, refines you, transforms you. That's the secret. So that's the end of the 6th paragraph of this chapter, and we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you for being with me. Please do share your insights. Any feedback, any comment, most welcome. See you next week.